So when you think about China's economy, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it this image of gigantic, endless factories? The very reason we call it the world's factory? Or maybe it's the skyline, these futuristic, glittering cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen that seem to have just shot up out of the ground in, a single generation? Or perhaps it's that heavy, politically loaded word you hear all the time, communist. It's a label that, let's be honest, comes with a whole library of assumptions, most of them gathering dust since the Cold War. For decades, it seems like the entire world, from policymakers in D.C. to investors on Wall Street, has been trying to figure China out by cramming it into a box that looks familiar to us. We keep using our own playbooks, our own economic theories, and we expect it to behave in a way we can predict. But here's the thing. As economist Keyu Jin explains, these labels, these playbooks, they just don't work. They get completely lost in translation. She tells this amazing story about when she first moved to the United States for high school. She was just hit with this blizzard of questions, all coming from this very specific and frankly, very simplistic Western viewpoint. Things like, so when is China finally going to become a democracy? Or do you feel oppressed living under the Communist Party? And of course, when is that crazy economic growth finally going to collapse? It was a real wake-up call for her. She realized that even the smartest, most well-intentioned people were working with a mental model of China that was just fundamentally wrong. The country they were picturing was a universe away from the one she was actually living in. A place that was just buzzing with excitement, with an incredible energy, and this almost tangible optimism about everything. New economic reforms, mind-blowing technologies, and a future that just felt wide open, completely limitless. You fast forward to today, and that nation has gone through a transformation that is truly unprecedented in all of human history. It's now the world's second biggest economy, a central hub for global trade, finance, you name it. And yet, so many of the same questions, the same misunderstandings, are still floating around. The world is still trying to read China using an old, worn-out, outdated playbook. Well, this is about throwing that old playbook right out the window. Our goal here is to try and understand China's story in its own language, to get a handle on its unique, its incredibly complex, and its often misunderstood operating system. We're going to demystify its economy by looking at the new playbook it's running from.
Okay, this quote. This one sentence from Keyu Jin really gets to the absolute heart of the puzzle we're going to try and solve together. Just take a second and let that sink in. I've rarely seen a more capitalist society than China. How? How is that possible? How can a country that is officially, constitutionally, a single-party socialist republic, led by the Communist Party of China, be described by a leading economist as one of the most capitalist places on the planet? It just sounds like a complete, head-spinning contradiction. But if you spend any time on the ground in China's big cities, the evidence for this intense, almost raw capitalism is everywhere you look. Keyu Jin says she has rarely seen companies that are as ferociously competitive, or a population that is as ambitious and, let's be real, as obsessed with making money as they are in China. This is not the picture of some passive, state-controlled workforce that people might have in their heads. No, this is a culture where, on the business side, competition is everything. It's a winner-take-all world that defines whole industries. It's a place where hard work isn't just a means to an end. It's practically a moral virtue, seen as the only real way to get ahead. And at the same time, this is just one side of the coin. This hyper-competitive, individualistic economic drive exists right alongside this deep, pervasive sense of community, of the collective, and a powerful, ever-present state. I mean, you can walk through any city park in the morning and see dozens of highly organized social groups singing together, dancing in perfect unison, practicing Tai Chi. There is this powerful drive for social harmony, for the collective good, that feels fundamentally different from the West's focus on the individual. So how can these two worlds, this cutthroat capitalism and this deep desire for social harmony, this absolute state control, and this wild, untamed entrepreneurial spirit, how do they exist in the same place at the same time? Well, that is the China puzzle. And to solve it, we need to understand the unique rules of the game.
All right, so to figure this all out, we're going to take China's new playbook and break it down piece by piece. First up, we're going to dive deeper into the China puzzle itself and really try to get beyond those simplistic labels that just cause so much confusion. Then we are going to explore a concept that I'm willing to bet you've never heard of before, but it is the secret engine behind China's unbelievable growth, the mayor economy. After that, we'll step into the world of Chinese companies, and it's a world that is starkly divided into what Keyu Jin calls the paradise and the jungle. From there, we'll switch gears and focus on an unexpected and incredibly powerful economic force, the new consumer generation, a group that was uniquely forged by one of the most drastic social experiments in modern history. And finally, we'll look to the horizon and examine China's next great leap, the huge, critical, and frankly, incredibly difficult transition it has to make to secure its future.
Let's kick things off with the puzzle itself. For years, it feels like the experts have been stuck in this binary debate, trying to understand China through a Western framework with words that just don't quite fit. Is it communist? Is it capitalist? Is it a command economy? Or is it a market economy? Deng Xiaoping, the leader who really architected modern China, he just sidestepped this whole mess with this brilliant bit of pragmatism. He famously said, "It does not matter whether a cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice." With that one simple phrase, he basically shut down the feverish, paralyzing debate about ideological purity that had been crippling China for decades. He set the country on this entirely new path of economic experimentation. The very idea that a market economy could be used as a tool to build socialism, that was a huge ideological breakthrough. And this right here is the absolute key to the whole puzzle. China's model doesn't fit neatly into any of the boxes we already have. It's something different. It's something new.
So the solution to this puzzle is to recognize that China is running on what you can only really call a hybrid model. Now, this isn't just, a simple mix and match. It's a really unique, dynamic, and often tense fusion of two forces that should be pulling in opposite directions. On one side, you have this incredibly powerful state coordination. Just think about this for a second. How does a developing country, in just a few short years, become the largest producer, the largest consumer, and the largest exporter of electric vehicles in the entire world? That does not happen by accident. It takes a massive, top-down, state-led push. You have the central government setting these wildly ambitious targets, rolling out a nationwide network of charging stations basically from scratch, organizing these incredibly complex battery supply chains, and using subsidies and regulations to literally change consumer habits on a national scale. The state can just scrap old rules and make new ones practically overnight if it serves a strategic goal. So that's one side. But on the other side, you have powerful market incentives. At the micro level, the market is allowed to just work its magic. Consumers are free to shop for the best product. Companies innovate like crazy to get an edge over their rivals. Good investments lead to huge returns. It's this one-of-a-kind combination. State guidance at the macro level with powerful market competition at the micro level that really explains China's rapid, targeted growth. It's a system of contradictions where the state and the market are in this constant tug of war. And it's right there in that tension that you find China's unique and powerful economic formula.
So that's the theory, a hybrid model of state and market. But how does that actually work on the ground? How do you get from an abstract idea to actual skyscrapers and high-speed rail lines crisscrossing the country? Well, that brings us to the first core concept in this new playbook. The mayor economy. This is the secret sauce. It's the underlying mechanism that takes the central government's grand vision and turns it into concrete reality. And it's a government structure that is fundamentally unlike anything we have in the West. Understanding this goes a long way to explaining how on earth China has managed to reform, industrialize, urbanize, and now innovate at such a blistering, world-changing speed.
The whole dynamic of the mayor economy is built on that same tension we were just talking about, but this time it's applied to how the country is governed. So at the very top, you have extreme political centralization. The central government in Beijing, especially the Politburo, it basically acts like the senior management team or the board of directors of a massive corporation we could call China Incorporated. They're the ones who set the big strategic goals for the whole country, things like we need to hit X% of GDP growth this year, or we need to become the world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. But, and this is the brilliant part, Beijing does not micromanage how those goals are achieved. That power is radically decentralized. The local officials, the city mayors, the provincial governors, they're the ones whose job it is to deliver the results on the ground. And the critical piece is that they are incentivized to act not like paper-pushing bureaucrats, but like entrepreneurs. Or, as the source material puts it, like effective equity stakeholders in their own region. Their entire career, their path up the political ladder, depends almost solely on their economic performance. So if a mayor supports good private companies, if they help build up an industrial cluster, if they create jobs, that boosts their region's GDP, that in turn increases local tax revenue and drives up real estate prices, which is a huge source of local funding. This success gets them noticed by the leadership in Beijing, and that's how they earn a promotion. This system creates this powerful built-in incentive for local officials to lend a helping hand to business, not a grabbing one that's going to stifle it. And it's this unique marriage, this partnership between politically ambitious local officials and fearless private entrepreneurs that has been the engine that has completely transformed China's economic landscape. Okay, so let's shift from the government structure to the corporate world and see how this all plays out for actual businesses. If the mayor economy is the engine of growth, then the companies are the cars on the road. But in China, not all cars are created equal, and they are definitely not treated the same. To really get your head around the corporate world there, Keyu Jin uses this incredibly powerful and memorable analogy. It perfectly captures the wildly different experiences of state-owned companies and private companies. It's a world that is split right down the middle, into the paradise and the jungle. These two worlds, paradise and jungle, they operate under completely different rulebooks. For the state-owned enterprises, the SOEs, life is a paradise. These are the giants, the big players in sectors like banking, energy, telecommunications, construction. They are backed by the full faith and credit of the state. What that means is they get privileged, super easy access to low-interest loans from state-owned banks. They get favorable treatment from regulators. Basically, they have all sorts of advantages. But their main goal isn't necessarily to make the most profit for their shareholders. No, they are the foot soldiers of the national strategy. Think back to the 2008 global financial crisis. While economies everywhere else were collapsing, it was China's SOEs that were called upon by Beijing to invest heavily in these massive infrastructure projects to keep the economy afloat and prevent mass unemployment. They serve the state's goals, first and foremost. Now, on the complete other side of the corporate universe, you've got the private firms. And for them, it is a jungle. They face huge barriers to entry, a mountain of bureaucratic red tape, and they've historically struggled to get loans from the state-run banking system. They operate in this environment of just ferocious, unrestrained competition, where you have to be incredibly nimble, unbelievably innovative, and sometimes you have to be willing to bend the rules just to survive. It's a world where entrepreneurs have to work harder, be more creative, and take more punishment to succeed than almost anywhere else on Earth. And this brings us to the most stunning, the most counterintuitive result of this entire system. Despite being forced to live and compete in the jungle, it is the private sector that has become the dominant, the most dynamic force in China's entire economy. The numbers from the source material they're staggering. They really speak for themselves. Private companies now account for 50% of the nation's tax revenue, 60% of its GDP, 70% of its innovation, and an absolutely massive 80% of its urban jobs. Just think about that for a second. 4 out of every 5 jobs in China's cities are not created by the state, but by the private sector. If you go back just a few decades to 1990, the private sector share of the economy was basically nothing, almost zero. Today, these are the companies that are driving growth. And that tells you something really profound about the entrepreneurial spirit that has just been unleashed in China. Even with the deck systematically stacked against them, these private firms haven't just survived the jungle, they have thrived in it. They've become incredibly efficient, customer-focused, and innovative out of sheer Darwinian necessity. All right, now we're going to make a pretty big pivot. We've talked a lot about the production side of the economy, the government structures, the companies that build all the stuff. But for decades, China's growth was all about investment and exports. The future, though, depends on a new and maybe even more powerful engine, the Chinese consumer. And to really understand this consumer, we have to look at how a single, drastic, and let's face it, controversial government policy unexpectedly created one of the most unique and powerful consumer classes in the entire world.
The one-child policy, which was in place for over 30 years, it had this cascade of massive social and economic effects that nobody at the time could have possibly seen coming. It all started back in the 1980s. With families limited to just one child, this famous trade-off studied by Nobel laureate Jerry Becker kicked in. Parents all over the country shifted from investing in the quantity of their children to investing in the quality of their one child. They poured every resource they had, all their hopes, all their ambitions into that single child. And that triggered this national education arms race that, frankly, is still going on today. By the 2000s, this whole process had created this super educated, confident, and often globally minded generation that started to enter the workforce. And now, here we are in the 2020s, and they have become an absolutely formidable economic force. Because they never experienced the poverty and turmoil that their parents and grandparents did, they have a completely different mindset. They are big spenders. And unlike their savings-obsessed parents, they are prodigious borrowers. They're also looking for a better work-life balance, valuing happiness and experiences more than just piling up wealth. They're socially conscious, they're digitally native, and they are fundamentally reshaping the Chinese economy with their tastes and their demands.
This chart reveals another huge unexpected consequence of that one-child policy. China's household saving rate is a massive global outlier. At around 30%, it just dwarfs that of other major economies. So why? Why so high? It's not just some cultural thing about being thrifty. A huge driver is demographics. In the past, Chinese parents would traditionally rely on having multiple children, especially sons, to support them when they got old. But the generation of parents under the one-child policy, they knew they would likely only have one child to count on, and that compelled them to save way more for their own retirement. On top of that, the tragic risk of losing that one child created another powerful incentive to save for a rainy day.
This demographic pressure, combined with a pretty weak social safety net, created a nation of super savers. And that built up this colossal pool of domestic capital that would go on to fuel the country's investment-led growth for decades. So what happens to that colossal pool of savings? How does it actually get used in the economy? Well, a huge part of the answer lies in this fascinating idea, the six-wallet phenomenon. This is a direct result of the one-child policy, that crazy high savings rate, and this national obsession with owning a home as a prerequisite for getting married and having security. So imagine you're a young couple in a big city and you want to buy your first apartment. The down payment looks like an impossible amount of money. But you don't have to come up with it on your own. You can draw on your own savings, that's 2 wallets right there. Plus, you can tap the entire life savings of the husband's parents, that's 2 more wallets, so we're at 4. And the entire life savings of the wife's parents, that's the final 2, for a total of 6 wallets. And honestly, it often doesn't even stop there. You might have 4 grandparents chipping in as well. So that's 6, 8, maybe even 10 or more wallets, all contributing to one down payment. This massive intergenerational transfer of wealth has been a key factor fueling China's enormous housing boom, and it's allowed this new generation to become homeowners at a much younger age than their peers in the West. So we've looked at the key pieces of China's unique playbook, this hybrid model, the mare economy that drives production, the dynamic private sector that was born in the jungle, and the rise of this powerful new consumer generation. And all of that brings us to the final and most critical chapter in our story, China's next great leap. After 4 decades of what can only be described as miraculous growth, the country is now facing a monumental challenge. It's a great test that will decide whether it can escape the dreaded middle-income trap and finally join the ranks of the world's truly wealthy, high-income nations. This right here, this is the great test. The old model, the one that was based on suppressing domestic consumption so you could subsidize massive investment in production for export, the very model that lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, that model has now run its course. It created huge economic imbalances, it created trade friction with the rest of the world, and it's just not sustainable anymore. As Keyu Jin argues so compellingly in the source material, unless China can successfully make this transition to become a consumption superpower, it will likely fail to become a rich country like South Korea or Japan were able to. They both successfully made this exact, very difficult transition. The entire future of China's prosperity and its ability to deliver on the dreams of its people now hinges on its ability to rebalance its economy inward and unleash the full potential of its 1.4 billion consumers. So how does China make this leap? Well, the new playbook is going to require 3 really crucial and difficult shifts. First, it needs to further open up its huge service sector. Sectors like finance, healthcare, entertainment, they're still heavily protected. But this is where the high-quality jobs are for that new, highly educated generation. They want to be creators, designers, entrepreneurs, not workers on an assembly line. The service sector is the key to boosting employment and raising incomes, which you have to have for consumption. Second, boosting domestic consumption. This isn't just an internal issue, it has global implications. China's massive exports have created trade friction all over the world. By consuming more of what it produces, China can help create a more balanced global economy and, as the source puts it, give other nations a chance to participate fairly in the global supply chain. This is about creating harmony not just inside China, but with the rest of the world. And third, the government and companies need to genuinely focus on work-life balance. That infamous 996 work culture, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, is completely out of sync with the values of the new generation. To really drive consumption, the system needs to align with their desire for a higher quality of life, not just a higher salary. So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that the old models, the simple labels, and the Cold War-era stereotypes we started with, they are completely and utterly useless for understanding the China of today, let alone the China of tomorrow. Its historic journey has been powered by a unique and internally consistent playbook, this hybrid system pairing political centralization with economic decentralization, this 2-track corporate world of state-sponsored paradise and hyper-competitive jungle, and a new generation of consumers shaped by unprecedented social change. The growth at all costs approach that defined its rise is now giving way to a necessary search for a new model, one that's based on slower but saner and more sustainable growth, focused on innovation, quality of life, and domestic demand. And that brings us to our final lingering question. The very system that made China an economic miracle, it also presents its greatest challenge for the future. You see, a system that is unparalleled in its power to mobilize the entire nation for big industrial projects, like building high-speed rail or an entire EV industry from scratch. That system may not be as good at fostering the kind of breakthrough 0-to-1 innovation that you need to become a true high-income nation.
A state that is incredibly efficient when everyone is focused on the single goal of economic growth might struggle to manage the competing demands of a more complex, a more prosperous, and a more diverse society. The immense power of the state has been China's greatest asset, but it could also pose its gravest risk. Can this playbook adapt? Will that unique blend of state and market that powered its incredible rise, will it be flexible enough to navigate the very different challenges that are waiting up ahead? The answer to that question will not only define China's future, but it will profoundly reshape the global economy for all of us for decades to come.